Good morning. My name is Natalia Kuraeva. I'm a senior instructional designer at University Online Education Services at Rutgers University. On behalf of 2025 Rutgers University Online Learning Conference, I welcome Theresa McCutcheon, Executive Director, Rebecca Swann-Jackson, Manager, and Melissa Garfinkel, Evaluation Coordinator from the Institute for Families School of Social Work. We are pleased to have them share their thoughts on promoting DEIB and accessibility in learning. During the presentation, please engage using the live chat session. You may pose any questions you have using Q&A, and the presenters will answer them as we go along and also at the end of the presentation. Please chat. Uh, please use chat for links to resources related to this presentation. Welcome, everybody, and let's start.
Good morning. We're glad to have everyone with us. My colleagues and I are really happy to be with you, especially on this rainy day. We've got some great information and some energy to share with you about this important subject matter. Joining me today are Dr. Rebecca Swann-Jackson and Melissa Garfinkel, and you'll be meeting them later today in the workshop. We want to start our time together with an exercise to frame our session and really talk about the context of why we do what we do and how we do it. I'm going to ask you to visualize a few images. Before I talk to you about those images, I want to ask you to keep in mind the first images, the first pictures that come to your mind when I ask you this question. What if you were asked to share an image of a family? What does that family look like? And keep in mind what comes to your brain as an image and how you would start to describe that. You might want to put a few descriptions, if you're comfortable, in the chat. You may want to just hold that image for yourself. What does a family mean to you? Do you think you pictured or described the same images that others did? Would that family have represented the audience or the target individual you support or you educate in your daily work? What if I asked you to share a photo of a family representing the students or the stakeholders that you educate? Would that family look different? Let's take a look at some images. If you look at the diversity of images and the family compositions on this slide, I'm going to ask you, did they represent what you first envisioned and how you would describe a family or your connection to a family? You can drop a chat. Do you see your family represented there? The family that you thought, that you portrayed when I asked you that question? What if I asked you to think of an image of a family who was involved in child protective services? Would that family look different as the first family that came to mind? Or a course or a workshop about preparing families to send a child off to college? Would that be a different family composition? Would that individual have different characteristics? I see some great answers. Yes. You see yourself represented or that family represented. Rita shares no. Any of us can be any family with any involvement at any time. What if I asked you to pull some pictures together of families with a history of substance use disorder or homelessness? That concept of a family and how we represent people, how we define people, and how we ensure that we're creating a community of belonging is what we want to talk about today. And this exercise frames the why of our discussion together and the importance of what we're considering together. Let's go to our next slide, Melissa. We're excited to share with you the tools and the body of work we're creating at the Institute for Families to guide the development of our learning experiences. As Natalia shared, at the Institute for Families here at the School of Social Work, we're committed to advancing the professional practices of those who impact and can brighten the future of children. So it's really important when we think about the workforce that we're educating. We educate largely the child support and human service workforce in the state, the early childhood workforce, as well as the child welfare or child protective workforce in the state. That's more than 10,000 professionals. And our education supports them in bringing research and best practice to their work. So how we create learning materials for them is something that we want to be based on evidence and practice, but also on our concepts of belonging. So in part one, we're going to be talking about our concept, what frames our work and the why of what we do. In part two, we're going to be walking through a guidance document. This is going to reveal the body of work that Melissa and Rebecca have done to create those evidence-based resources and guide our practices to frame the work that we do in creating learning experiences, learning materials, trainings, courses, presentations, workshops, all of the dissemination of education that we do. And then finally, we're going to walk through those reflective tools. And we're going to look at how you can take some of those materials, some of that guidance, some of those tips, and implement them into your practice. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Rebecca, to take us into them.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to apologize. I hope you can hear me okay. My computer is not recognizing my camera, so you can't see me. Can you hear me, Tess? Okay. So we started this work essentially to solve a problem. We were not having a problem preparing learning products that were inclusive and representative of the audiences participating in our training. The problem was that we were not intentional and research and best practice based in applying concepts of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging to the development of our learning products. Next slide, Melissa. At IFF, we benefit from a team dedicated to researching innovative practices and assessing areas of improvement. Through our collaboration, we engage in an iterative process and routinely reevaluate our work and practices. To increase institutional focus on DEIB and our learning products, we needed to know more about how to address DEIB and accessibility, particularly concerning images, graphics, scenarios, and other components. This meant preparing a guidance document and reflective tools to ensure that our learning products were reflective of best practices for DEIB and A in the design and development process. As best practices and language evolve, work around DEIB must be routinely updated and communally added to. And because we're academics doing practical and applied work, we use these approaches to solve the problem. All right, next slide. But first, some definitions. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, currently a rather dirty word in our current culture. It's a conceptual framework that promotes the fair treatment and full participation of all people, especially in the workplace, including populations who have been historically underrepresented or subject to discrimination because of their background, identity, disability, etc. DEIB is an extension of DEI that highlights belonging as a part of an overall strategy to deepen inclusion and invite acknowledgement, acceptance, and authenticity for all. Next slide. But this is why all of this matters. The goal of this work has been to bring awareness and focused attention to the unspoken and unwritten messages that may exist in learning experiences and materials for child and family serving professionals, family members, children, and youth, and caregivers. In May of 2020, the Rutgers University School of Social Work faculty voted to adopt Dr. Barbara Love's Liberatory Consciousness Framework, which addresses anti-racism and oppression to further the goals of the inclusivity, intersectionality, diversity, equity, and awareness team for social justice at our school, and for agencies that partner within our school to carry out the School of Social Work's core mission. In fall of 2022, the Rutgers School of Social Work began to use the Liberatory Consciousness Framework to guide the teaching, learning, collaborative leadership, and related research and educational priorities, inspired by the School of Social Work's mission and strategic plan called Towards a More Just Future. So liberatory consciousness is awareness of oppression and intentionality about changing systems of oppression. The LCF offers a framework for thinking about how anti-oppression concepts such as anti-racism and diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging should guide the work developed by the Institute for Families. The LCF contends that to be aware, we must recognize that we live in an oppressive society that enables racial, social, economic, and health inequities to persist, despite their negative impacts on individuals, families, and communities. Living in awareness requires that we pay attention to our behaviors and non-behaviors, our language and our thoughts, which impact how we interact in our communities and how our society may be contributing to systems of oppression. The Liberatory Consciousness Framework has 4 A's: awareness, analysis, action, accountability, and allyship. There are 4 phases to understanding and having a greater awareness of oppression. It's the A for awareness that initiated our work towards action, which is creating this guidance and creating these reflective tools. And this informed the creation of the body of work. All right, next slide. So the guidance requires us to focus on the first A, as I mentioned, awareness. And awareness requires that you ask yourself, what behaviors do I engage in that contribute to an oppressive society? And how is what is happening in society contributing to the oppression of individuals, families, groups, or communities? In the context of this effort, we also need to be asking ourselves, am I aware of the unwritten messages or hidden curriculum conveyed by this content for those engaging in, represented in, and impacted by the material?
For IFF, awareness means that we need to examine our educational and research commitments, and we could help do so through some questions like what we display on this slide. To give some examples, what formal and informal rules, assumptions, or values are important for the body of work being produced, but not explicitly stated in the objectives or content? What unwritten messages does the content produced convey about those engaging in the course, represented in the content, and impacted by the learning? Is there a hidden curriculum embedded in the body of work that intentionally guides or reinforces values, stereotypes, or presumptions about the target audience or persons represented in the content? In which ways could this hidden curriculum potentially discriminate against some participants? And have we represented diversity authentically and equitably in the images, words, and examples developed within our materials? Overall, it's important to uncover and be aware of internal biases as an ongoing practice. It's also crucial to solicit feedback from others about the design process and about the materials produced to foster a more inclusive learning environment. Designers should also ask what aspects lead to the exclusion of a user and then solve those barriers to access. Displayed are some questions to help better center the audience for design. So those questions might include, are you considering the identity of your learners? How might you design to eliminate oppression and exclusion? Do the cognitive learning objectives appeal to different types of thinking? Does the format of the course material respond to a range of learning preferences? What learning modality would be best for educating participants on this topic? What might be creating access or barriers to learning the content? Are the materials accessible to all learners, and can accessibility be improved? And how much flexibility is there in course design to modify and adjust to meet the learning opportunities that arise in the moment during trainings? So in this section, we're going to go over the guidance document as a whole. So in our active commitment towards justice at IFF, we began the creation of the guidance document to bring awareness of these, as we've mentioned, the unspoken and unwritten implicit messages that could exist in learning materials. And as Rebecca highlighted, we intend for this document to be a living document to evolve and change over time as we find new best practices, as terminology changes. So we intend to keep that in mind moving forward. So the guidance document itself has 3 main sections. So the sections are the design process, best practices relating to inclusion and belonging, and then best practices as it relates to accessibility. So in the design process section, we discuss the overall guiding design principles and frameworks that we draw from and use as a backbone for the rest of the guidance document. In the inclusion and belonging section, we cover how designers and developers should approach the design of products with attention to creating material that focuses on the fair treatment and equitable representation of all people. The section specifically includes tips and best practices for design of content, use of language, choices of graphics, images, and icons, as well as a larger section on data and training evaluation. And then the accessibility section addresses how learning products, materials, and experiences should be designed or structured to ensure that all people can learn and participate. So first, one of our larger design guiding principles is the inclusive ADDIE model. So IFF's learning and design team was already using the ADDIE model to guide the development of learning products. The original ADDIE model is an iterative instructional design process with 5 stages: analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. And then at the end of each stage, there's space for reflection and feedback that brings the steps back into a loop, so continuous improvement. The inclusive ADDIE model was created to support the diversity, equity, and inclusion in instructional design and course development. So it adds 9 substages to the original ADDIE model. We'll go over them briefly. So the first stage relating to analysis is introspection. So that's reflecting on yourself and your teaching to consider your current capabilities. The second stage is needs. So contemplating who the trainees are and the types of professionals they seek to become. The third is context. So that's examining the smaller contexts of the course, such as the subject matter and learning objectives, and also the larger context, like the climate of the institution, of the field as a whole. The next section is called lesson. It has more to do with design. So that's considering strategies to explore equitable instruction, particularly focusing on diversity represented in course material, technology disparities, and diverse student backgrounds. Section 5 is understanding. So for each course objective, consider what can be measured and how effective the assessment tools are that we're using. The 6th section is supporting structures. So that's examining the supporting structures of a course, which could include the policies, rules, and other scaffolds that determine how the course is run. The 7th subsection, interactions. So that's considering the processes for facilitating in-group, in-class, and online interactions. And then the next section, section 8, values. So that's using quantitative, qualitative, and other mixed methodology approaches to assess training effectiveness, so they actually be gaining that feedback. And then the last stage is evolution. So that's using personal reflection and those in-course assessments to gather findings and then implement further improvements to the course, therefore taking you back to the start of this process as well. Another large framework we draw from is UDL, or Universal Design for Learning. So that's a strategy that's intended to work for everyone in all scenarios with all contingencies, essentially being a one-size-fits-all approach. UDL has the objective of making products, environments, or interfaces usable by as many people as possible without the need for adaptation. So an example in our day-to-day lives of UDL in design is using, for example, like an entrance, a ramp to get into a building instead of stairs or in addition to stairs. In that sense, people who use mobility aids can use the ramp, and people who do not need mobility aids can still just as easily use the ramp. So now people don't have to ask for accommodations just to get into the building, and they feel welcomed off the bat. They know that the design included them. So that's how we highlight UDL in course design. So our next section is the inclusion and belonging section. So this section covers how designers and developers should approach the design of products with attention to creating materials that focus on the fair treatment and equitable representation of all people. It has 5 subsections, which we're going to get into more specifically in these next few slides. This is probably one of the most dense sections in the guidance document. So our first subsection, spatial design, it's a conceptual discipline that prioritizes both style and function to plan the design of virtual or physical spaces with users' comfortability and access in mind. More specifically, it encourages paying attention to hierarchies in design and how spacing or sizes of images convey messages. That's what we tried to show with the graphic on the screen. Visual hierarchy is a technique that designers use to structure and arrange elements in a way that allows audiences to quickly perceive how important different pieces of information are. Social hierarchies, on the other hand, are implicit ways that we perceive the importance of people, and often the former influences and reflects the latter. So we encourage people to pay close attention to whether certain people or experiences are being emphasized more than others. The next subsection, language. So this subsection provides recommendations on how to use language and what language to avoid using in materials. Specifically, these recommendations revolve around plain language guidance and different group and identity-specific language do's and do nots. To highlight, though, plain language is language that is clear, concise, well-organized, and follows other best practices appropriate to the subject or field and the intended audience. Language should reflect inclusive terms and racial equity awareness. The third subsection is graphics, images, and icons. So this subsection provides recommendations on how to use graphics, images, and icons in the materials being produced. More specifically, some tips. It's important to consider how the specific lived experiences and perspectives of end users will inform how they perceive information that's presented to them. It's important to use diverse and inclusive images in all infographics and to really critically think about what your images convey and if they're representative of who will be using the course, going back to our intro activity. And to avoid using icons that make inappropriate depictions of people or communities or reinforce stereotypes. Our next subsection is the data subsection. So that provides recommendations on how to present data in the materials produced, including how to use graphics to present data in meaningful ways, reflecting on how data was collected, and questions to consider when creating visuals or presenting data. Data collection often involves power imbalances, with the researcher acting as a person with control and the researched as people being controlled. It's therefore important to be aware of how questions are phrased and asked, how people were compensated for their time or benefit directly from their participation, the ways in which data were collected, analyzed, interpreted, and shared may reinforce existing inequalities. And our last subsection is the evaluation subsection. So we are going to get into this further, more specifically around training evaluation, because that's something we work with very closely at IFF. So these next few slides will break that down more closely.
I can jump in if, Rebecca, you're having, I know you've got some connection issues. When we talk about training evaluation and that guidance, we're talking about two areas. One, how we're forming those survey questions. As we talked about earlier, the importance of plain language so that the words and the questions that we're using are understood by a wide range of skill levels and identities. We look at literacy at an 8th grade reading level. And we specifically want to look at, were participants comfortable approaching and asking questions of the trainer, the instructor, the moderator? Did they feel included? Were they able to fully access the learning content and that experience? Where and how that learning experience can be improved is also something that we're consistently asking about and measuring. And we want to ensure that that information is then shared. We put that together in reports that are shared with our design teams, as well as our instructor and facilitator teams, and our stakeholders as well. We also looked at our satisfaction surveys and made some changes to include that, to ensure that it was also inclusive. And we were asking about how we were doing in our DEIB principles and values. On a Likert scale, we measure how the course was representative of a wide range of identities, or was it representative of a wide range of identities? Did the course include a variety of viewpoints? Did that participant feel comfortable asking the trainer questions? Was the training a positive and inclusive learning environment from their point of view? Did the breakout rooms give them a positive experience and a collaborative learning opportunity? Were there needs for accommodation met? And most importantly, did that environment make them feel safe to explore different ideas, whether they agreed or disagreed with them? Some of the other examples we asked for in open-ended questions were asking for any additional feedback about the training they would like us to know. And we give them some prompts to consider describing, again, was it an inclusive environment where they felt a sense of belonging? Did we facilitate their engagement and their ability to learn? Did we foster an environment where they felt safe, again, to share ideas and disagree? And again, were there needs for accommodation met, if they had any, or if there was something that came to mind in that experience?
And our next section on accessibility provides recommendations and best practices for incorporating specific design strategies to make learning products accessible for all learners and participants. Some subsections to highlight within the accessibility section is we talk a lot about language, about visual accessibility, which can include things like font size, color, effects. Accessibility as it relates to alternative text and captioning, also interpreting, and then general best practices with different technology, such as screen readers, again, different animations and effects, and specific programs like PowerPoint, Adobe, other programs. We're going to get into more specific points that we draw out from the accessibility section and from the sections we've already discussed in these next few slides as we discuss the reflective tools. Rebecca, are you able to join? If not, I could go further through these sections. I believe we may still be having some technical issues. So for the reflective tools, these are tools that we developed to use concurrently as we're working on different content being developed. So these tools are intended, hold on, let me go to this slide. So these tools are intended to help explore different questions relating to inclusion and belonging and accessibility. They're supposed to help instructional designers to really make sure that their content is focused and inclusive, and then supervisors to go back through and check as well, to have a lot of eyes on the content.
And Melissa, I can join you for some points on this, given
Yes.
the technical issues we're having. So as Melissa shared, these tools are intended to be guidance that are just incorporated into our practices for developing content, for supervisors and coaching and using these principles and this guidance, as well as for our evaluators and presenters to use. And as you heard earlier, this guidance and these tools have been an iterative process. They were developed very much with a lot of internal input. We've got teams of instructional designers, supervisors, and then evaluators who have provided input in the language that helps bridge, what research or evidence is suggesting in the literature and what it means to practice as they're developing content. And as we were developing the materials, our teams of instructors and team members who work with our trainers, we probably work with over 100 different consultants. We also have a team of full-time trainers. Those consultants are trainers for us on a regular basis who said, hey, this is something for us to consider also as we're delivering. So you'll see these tools continue to evolve then for presenters as well in our next iteration.
Yes, thank you, Tess, for the extra context, because I think it's really critical to this work. We have some examples here that we pulled out from the actual reflective tools. So we break these down by different subsections in terms of theme of how these questions are organized. So to read some of these as examples, are the course objectives clear to the targeted learner? So these ones are all about course design itself. Did you include a statement explicitly affirming the values of and appreciation for diverse experiences and perspectives in enhancing class discussions and learning? Did this training offer representation? Example, images, cultural perspectives, scenarios of diverse groups? Does this course engage learners using methods and activities that respond to different learning styles? In instructor-led courses, do you incorporate learning spaces, example, breakout rooms, group discussions, that are driven by participant voices? Do you provide texts, resources, and learning materials in the training that reflect varied culture, gender identity, sexual orientation, ethnicity, belief systems, spirituality, traditions, and language and differences in socioeconomic status, ability, and family structure? If there are discussions on history or context, do they engage responsible and contemporary experiences of discrimination, racism, and marginalization?
And I want to expand on those 2 points when we talk about the tool. Especially as more and more of our practices and our daily life become integrated with AI and artificial intelligence. When we think about where the construct of AI is pulling from information, it's coming from, and as we all know, it's pulling from the body of knowledge and constructs that exist in that digital universe. So there's lots of discussion about, when we're pulling information, really being aware that it's pulling information from a construct that may have embedded bias, may have embedded discrimination, because it represents perhaps a structure that in itself, is embedded with racism and marginalization. So not only in that content, but also in the images, as we're using AI to start to screen and shape everything from learning objectives to content to even images, we really want to be aware of how that information is being portrayed back to us. I'm going to share with you, I was using AI to create an image. I couldn't find the image I wanted of a group of students. And I thought it was a simple one, give me a group of students studying on campus. And sure enough, I got a group of students. They were represented by backpacks. They had earbuds in, they had books in their hand. They were clearly students, but they were all white students. So I thought, okay, let me, check my prompt again and let me remind AI that students come in, have lots of different characteristics and have lots of different diversity. So I changed my prompt to, show diversity in those students. So it did add diversity. It put a few students with darker skin in the back. Those students had the same size and dimension in the photo, but they were in the back. They also all had the same hair and facial features, as well as the same skin tone. So I prompted again, asked AI to further diversify the skin tone and the characteristics, and to move them in more prominent and equal locations, in that photo. And it couldn't quite get to what I was looking at, and ended up pixelizing. So maybe stronger prompting and wider variations of the content to choose from would change that over time. But it's a great example of how information in front of us or coming to us requires us to really check ourselves and check these examples. So when we're looking at images, we want to ask ourselves, do the icons and images portray diverse features? Hair texture, complexion, ability, nose shape, body size, age, religion, and do they reflect the diversity of the targeted learners and the world outside of the training? We find, particularly as we're using, whether it's stock photos or some of the rapid authoring tools or video editing tools, sometimes there's limits in the characters or in their characterizations that don't allow us to show that diversity. In photos that are used for a training, have we considered where people of diverse backgrounds are placed? Are they in the background? Are they made smaller than other individuals or other images? Are we honoring and giving them the same proximity of a white person, for example? Did we ensure that visuals are inclusive? Are we seeing same-sex couples, mixed race couples, different family compositions, different body sizes, couples in different age groups? Are we seeing older parents with younger children? Do we show practices of experience that take place in a variety of culture settings? So in the example of spirituality, are we showing mosques, synagogues, as well as churches, or community centers? Did we select images that show people in positions of power? That might be an elected official, a judge, a doctor, a supervisor, from a variety of identities, as well as a variety of genders and ages. And are images of individuals presented in ways that are not tokenized or used in stereotypical situations? So these are all things that we want to consider together as we're thinking about the images that we use. When we think about scenarios, where people from diverse groups displayed with dignity and respect, do they reflect the community and the clients served without reinforcing stereotypes or stigmas? Are our case scenarios always showing a single mother on welfare with children? Are we showing Black men who are incarcerated as the non-custodial parent, if we're using an example in child support, for example? Are we really thinking about what we're portraying and how we're reinforcing that? Do we provide scenarios that challenge these assumptions? And that's an opportunity that we have with our learners. Do the names of people in scenarios represent diverse cultures, but also avoid stereotypes? Do we use a range of pronouns and gender identities in scenarios? And in those activities and scenarios, were people depicted holding positions of power, as I mentioned, from different race, gender, and ethnicity? Are we showing persons with disabilities? And are we showing that experience to be consistent? So is that person who's portrayed as being in a wheelchair able to access that home, as Melissa shared earlier? Or are we showing stairs, which make it impossible for them to be a part of that home or of that community?
This next section, we focus on font and text in these questions. So some of these questions are very specific and technical, but did you select a sans serif font such as Arial, Calibri, MetaPro, Aptos, Helvetica, or an accessible font that is in your program's template? We recognize fonts change all the time about what's acceptable or not, so this will always have to be updated, but highlighting some fonts that are easier for people to read that don't blur together as much. Do you use a font size of 12-point or larger for instructor-led materials or 17-point font or larger for web-based materials? Did you use a font size of 20-point or larger for PowerPoint? Did you use plain language throughout the document and/or training? Did you provide definitions or a glossary for any phrases, idioms, acronyms, and abbreviations? This is part coupled in plain language and also especially, I feel like at Rutgers or in other institutions where we get very familiar with our own phrasing, but our audience might not be as familiar with our acronyms or with other technical or specific terms, to make sure we provide definitions for those. And did you avoid long sentences, with the ideal sentence length being between 45 and 75 characters? This is particularly notable for sentences that an audience would be reading, such as on a PowerPoint. And in this next section, we highlight some recommendations for alt text and for visual effects. So relating to alternative text, did you provide accurate alternative text descriptions for all images, even decorative images, pre-recorded audio and or video? So this way everyone can understand what's in the PowerPoint, can equally access the material and get the entire context. Also, is the alt text kept short and concise, around 125 characters or less? And did you review the default alt text, checking for accuracy and how the details of the image are described? This one's particularly important, relating back to what Tess was saying about the limitations of AI and the biases that it's already drawing from. Most of these alt text descriptions the default alt text descriptions are determined by AI and can have a lot of inaccuracies or outdated language or stereotypes. So reading through those as well. And then in terms of visual effects, did you provide a disclaimer with timestamps When using content or effects that are fast moving, blinking, strobing, flickering, have overlapping movement, video transitions, and animations? Did you use at least 2 sensory or spatial cues to highlight information, such as spatial relationships, page position, color, font, and size? This one's specific to help people who may not be able to utilize a certain sense to determine difference, such as if someone's colorblind. If you just make one thing a different color, they might not recognize that that's being highlighted. So a potential workaround for that is making that sentence a different color and bolded, so then they can see it through size and through color. And then, did you use technology to provide additional visual supports, such as descriptive narration, for participants who need them? So I know we just threw a lot of information out at everyone. So if there are any questions or comments, anything that came up for people as we've been talking, feel free to raise your hand, to share anything, or to leave something in the chat, and we could review those as well.
And as we're generating those questions or any comments, to give you background on how these were formed and where we came up with this body of work that Rebecca and Melissa have really led. I mentioned earlier our work as an institute and the reach that we have with the professionals who support children and families across New Jersey. We've worked with different jurisdictions nationally. And when we looked at guidance for learning content, most of us are familiar with what is has been formed around accessibility. But there wasn't a lot of content, there wasn't a lot organized that would guide us in checking our own biases or helping us really think about how do we design materials that create a sense of belonging, particularly if for us as an institute, our work is rooted in human services, social services, child welfare, but that's not the case for every instructional designer. That's not the case for every evaluator based on the body of work or every trainer. So we really wanted information that was going to help us think through how to ensure that we were holding true to our values as a community of professionals and our commitments to social justice, to DEIB, in the work that we were doing. The tools that are behind what we presented today consist of 2 things. Really a guidance document, that is the body of work that was presented a little earlier, that based on Barbara Love's liberatory consciousness, as well as a lot of really good information on anti-discrimination, anti-racism, and what we need to think about. So that guidance document is really the source. And then we have the tools themselves. And I'll share with you that our first versions of those tools were, we were even using the term checklist and had to kind of check ourselves because we didn't want this to be a checklist. We wanted these to be our practices and questions that we asked ourselves as we move through our work in creating content consistently. So we use them as tools and are looking to embed them in our body of work, and they are ever developing, as you heard. Are there any questions or anything that we can ask more about? And I'll also, on that, Rebecca, if there's anything in the chat, I know you haven't been able to connect consistently, but if there's anything in the chat that you wanted to add, please feel free to.
I don't see any questions here, but I actually have a question myself, if you don't mind. Did you have any feedback from your trainers who attempted to use your guide? Did you have any conversation? How did it affect their work?
Yeah, so I'll ask Melissa to certainly join me, but the real focus of this was for our instructional design teams. And we went through and came to the place that we're into today only because it was a partnership with them in providing feedback on, help me understand what this means when you say portray something this way, or telling us as instructional design experts and experts in adult design, adult learning, this stage is too late to be thinking about these pieces. We need this information in our design versus in our development. So the iterations of this were very much a partnership. I know some of our designers and supervisors are in the session today. We did about, I'm going to say 3 or 4 different sessions as large groups, and then follow up to move through and get their feedback to ensure that this made sense in terms of the actual practice. And then for the instructors, our teams who work with our trainers, our instructors, also said, hey, we want to see more of this for our individuals who are delivering the content. So much of our content is asynchronous, and we're creating instructor guides or participant guides, which this body of work helps create. But the second part of it then is if it is a synchronous or a live on-site delivery, those trainers then thinking about what they're doing in their facilitation to ensure that there's belonging in that classroom. So that'll be that next stage as our professionals who work with our trainers and some of our trainers themselves who had a voice throughout this will also help us look at what do I need to do and what guidance and questions should I be asking myself as I facilitate content if it's not a self-driven course.
Thank you so much, Theresa. We actually have a couple of questions. First question we have, what advice do you have for participants incorporating these reflective questions into their own work?
Do you want me to take that, Melissa? Do you want to jump
in? Either way, I think that's a really good question. I think it's important, for all of us as learners and participants as well to be reflecting on our own perspectives and the limitations of those and try to actively engage with different perspectives and evaluate the courses that we're going into to try to expand our own learnings as well, to learn about different avenues of the things that we're working on. And I feel like something that stuck out for me, even through doing this work, is examining how courses are structured as a whole too. So like as a participant, noticing, do courses feel like they're designed for different types of learning? Does it feel like there's different avenues for people to participate in different ways? One thing to highlight too is we focused a bit on this presentation on training evaluation, and I think it's really important for participants to be giving very honest feedback when possible about their experiences in training, and that helps improve trainings. I mean, we review all feedback we get on everything. So to really give that kind of feedback if you notice any areas of exclusion, any areas where you felt you didn't belong or notice that in other people, so we could continuously improve our designs.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Andrew would like to see your first slide, please, because he loved the wording and carefulness of each question. Can we scroll up and just focus on the slide for a minute, if possible? And also Latoya commenting that training evaluation sample questions were very helpful. So those are very positive feedback.
Oh, did you mean the questions from the reflective materials, or did you mean all the way in the beginning, these ones?
Both. Latoya mentioned talking about sample questions, and Andrew is talking about this first slide with a careful wording, probably this one.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice. Well, we have about 1 minute left, and I just want to thank you, our presenters, for such an informative and valuable presentation and information. I think audience had a lot of opportunities to learn and apply your guidance to their own work, and we had up to 42 people. So I thank you so much for this experience.
Yeah, thank you everyone for attending, and we want to highlight our emails are here on the slide too. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or want any additional information on things, because I know we're at time, but feel free to take a picture of this as well.